Before we dig into the content tonight, I wanted to just kind of make a couple of quick announcements here. As I think all of our viewers know, I am running for select board, and some have asked, hey, if you happen to get elected, are you still going to keep doing the unselects? And the answer is, I think so, but I'm not quite sure.
And we're back.
Woo! We're back. Hello, everybody.
Yes, the Unselects are back after a hiatus.
Yeah, long hiatus.
About 5 months.
Yeah, about that.
So I know everybody out there is probably wondering, are they going to talk about the select board meeting that occurred on the 23rd? And the answer is, we will get there. But we have a lot to cover since the last time I think we were here talking to anybody, correct,
Yeah,
Brian?
yeah. We got a new format here.
Yeah. And actually, just in case you're wondering where we are, we're actually in the new podcast studio that Shrewsbury Media Connection has created over here at Parker Road, which is just amazing. So
It's spectacular.
So a shout out to Mark, Liz, and the whole team here at SMC for putting this together for people. So if you yourself want to have your own podcast, feel free to come on down, talk to Mark, and you'll set you right up here. So we're giving this a shot.
Yeah, it can be anything. Food, talk about your pets, whatever you want.
Yeah.
Shrewsbury Pet Care 101.
So, Brian, let's dig right into this because the last time we left everybody, we were talking about 40Bs. I had mentioned I was running for select board. And as we saw in the opening there, we were like, are we going to continue this if I get elected? And the answer was maybe. Well, thankfully, I was elected.
Yeah,
And I am a member of the Shrewsbury Select Board. And with that, I will say, I will make a disclaimer. I'm here in my role as a Shrewsbury resident, like everybody else out there. I'm not representing the Select Board. I'm not representing the views of the Select Board of the town. I'm actually representing my own views, and we're just going to be talking of my opinions, of my experience, and kind of how that whole process goes and what we're doing on a daily basis here in town. So,
Hey, I got a burning question for you.
Yes.
What was the process for you to decide to come back to the Unselects? Was there a process with the town? Did you have to ask for permission? What happened there?
Well, fair question. I mean, in initial conversations, I think probably the first thing after I got elected back in May, and I do want to thank all those people who did vote for me. I was able to get second place, 1,800 and I think 80 something votes. I don't remember exactly, but I was fortunate enough to be elected. I mean, people in the community had put their trust in me that I would represent them well. And one of the first things I did is I met with Kevin Mizikar, the town manager, and I think he did bring that up and say, well, what are your thoughts about that show? And I said, well, I think it's really important because one of the things and the reason why I wanted to come back was, if you ever watch a select board meeting, the flow is not that organic. You can't really explicate your thinking. You don't really get into and explain, like, how did we get to this point on a certain issue? So I think it's really important. One of the things I think I got feedback from the Unselects when we did it before was people appreciated the depth we would go into, or we'd explain a topic and we had time to do it. You don't have that in the board meeting. So as much as I'd love to be able to articulate why we're talking about something, that's just not how those meetings work. So a lot of people still want to know what's going on in town. I don't really believe that there's a huge audience of people who fully understand the things we talk about on the select board. So that's really one of the reasons I want to get back. But there really was no requirement to ask for permission. I mean, I'm not going to be talking about any information that's not already public information, and we're not really going to be talking about, the other board members or things we used to do because they're now my peers. But we are going to talk about what's going on in Shrewsbury and my opinions and your opinions on what you believe is the right for the community.
I may have some opinions.
I know you are very opinionated, so I will have to say that. One thing I just wanted to go to as well is I did want to take a look quick and go back to that first meeting that I was able to have in the select board, because I do want to play another clip here of what that experience was like and kind of what those opening
Gregg
statements were
Richards,
made.
Congratulations on your election.
Thank
and
you.
Welcome to the board.
Thank you.
Anything you'd like to say?
Yes, I do.
Thank you for being your fan club.
Yeah, I trust me, I didn't invite them. But first, I actually do want to thank a couple people specifically. First, my wife, Christy, and my son, Gavin, because they did sacrifice a lot over the past 2 months and actually probably the last year as we've kind of gone through this whole process. And I do appreciate their support, because without them, I definitely wouldn't be sitting here right now. So I do appreciate that. I also want to thank, just the residents and the voters of Shrewsbury who put their faith in me to be sitting here tonight. And it is a very humbling experience going through it, a very stressful experience, but very, very rewarding, to on election night. And so I do want to just thank everybody within Shrewsbury, and I'm looking forward to actually working with everybody on this board for the betterment of our town.
And that
Pretty
was
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting is that how cool that is the fact that, when we started this over a year ago, right? It was just an idea. Then it came together and you had the idea of the Unselects. We got together and we really got, I think, a groundswell of people that suddenly got involved in civics, right? In literally town government, understanding that what happens there really does impact your life. And I think your ability to articulate those frustrations sometimes, right, and those concerns got you to where you are now, right? And I think that's a testament to not only you, but the people that listen and the people that ask questions and people that want to know more in their town government and how the town works and how these weird little laws can sometimes impact in a major way your life.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one of the things I think I also noticed is when people want to know that other people are involved before they kind of jump in sometimes. And I think what we've actually seen is whether we were speaking out against things or doing public comments before the whole election process, that kind of starts to get contagious. And we've seen other members of the community start to do that. I think other people who are more passionate about, let's say, things that are going on around the Board of Health.
Yeah.
And really, I've seen some individuals actually get progress about a public comment period with the Board of Health and getting in front of other boards and committees, and it's not just the select board. So I think when you kind of join with others and kind of lead by example, I think we've seen a lot more, in my opinion, a lot of people getting involved with the community. Just look at, we've seen a lot of turnover in town meeting. We've gotten a lot more people who, even when I was out at the Spirit of Shrewsbury last weekend, a lot of people came up to me and said, "Hey, I voted for you. I really like what you're doing. I really appreciate what you're doing. Keep going." So those are the things I really like, I think, about the whole thing, because at times, with all the time and effort putting into it, you start to wonder is it all worth it? But then when I do get the feedback, and whether that's, an email or just somebody coming up to me, it does make it all worth it for sure.
Can I ask you a couple questions?
Of course, Brian.
Yeah, I know you can't talk about too much, but how do these meetings actually work? Like, what's the process with the town manager and the other, what happens? Is there a behind the scenes that happens just to get the meeting set up and all of the agenda that goes through? What's that process?
Yeah, so happy to explain it. It's different, I think, depending on the board member, but my process is I actually I have a standing meeting. I meet with Kevin Mizikar twice a month, individually, one-on-one, just to make sure that any questions I have about ongoing agenda topics or things I want to see covered in the future, or if I want to go deeper on the specific topic I know we're going to cover, he and I will spend that time and go through all that, and we can do all that in a lot of detail. I wouldn't say it's a back room, quote unquote. I think when people hear back room or that term back room, what it really means is things are having conversations or things are discussed, not in a public meeting. And there are discussions individually. And just for instance, the way that the meetings work is there's a Google Drive that the town has. They put all the agenda topics up on the Google Drive for the board members to see. We can see the agenda ahead of time, but typically that agenda is not finalized until the Friday before a meeting, which are always on Tuesday. That agenda, I may have a complete agenda on Thursday, but typically it is all the way to Friday. So we don't have a ton of extra time to really go through a lot of the items, just because it's pretty dynamic as far as the topics. And at times, we may have to reach out over the weekend, or if there's a question to ask Kevin Mizikar, even another board member, we may have, there might be a conversation individually with board members, but it's not about going through and saying, "Hey, this is what we're going to vote this way on it." That doesn't happen. It doesn't.
Right. Yeah, I assumed it wouldn't. Yeah.
No. So, that's primarily what it is. So sometimes, though, the board does not have as much time as people think to really look at some of these things. They do come, 1 or 2 days ahead of time, and we're looking at a lot of the information, maybe 24, 48 hours ahead of the public when they see some things.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting because it's really the town manager and the sort of the paid staff that put together
Yeah.
all of the materials for you guys.
Correct. And the chair's job, let's just be clear. The one thing the chair does do is they do meet with Kevin, so the town manager, to finalize the agenda. So the chair's responsibility is to just make sure that everything on the agenda is understood by the chair, how the meeting's going to flow, and if there are additional things that are going to get put on there later, the chair will go ahead and do that as well.
Yeah.
So you do see that. I do want to pivot here because one of the things on the just to go back to the election, because one of the things I do want to talk about, because I feel as though didn't get as much discussion as maybe it should, is on the ballot in May, there was another piece that we voted on. Do you remember what that was?
DPW.
Yes.
Yeah.
And at the time, the DPW, well, I should say the DPW was rejected. The debt exclusion was rejected by the voters of Shrewsbury. Now, we had done an episode on the DPW. I believe it was actually episode 19, one of the last ones we had done prior to the election. So I do want to just kind of touch base on that a little bit because from my perspective, I think I understand it a lot better now. And just to give my perspective, because I think the voters deserve it. Now, I will go back a little bit here and explain why I got more involved in the DPW. Once we had the election and it was rejected, it's an important project. Like everybody admitted, like, hey, we probably want to get this back on the ballot because we need this building to help us operate for the next 50 years. I had asked, I said, if I'm going to get more involved or we're going to advocate for this project, I want to look at all the details around this. And my background, for those who don't know, because I don't know if I've ever even said this, is I am the vice president of sales at an electrical distributor. So I'm very familiar with electrical products when it comes to commercial, as well as residential electrical. But big projects like building big buildings, such as DPW building, we do a lot of electrical work for. So I'm pretty familiar. So I had asked, I said, hey, can I get a copy of the plans and specs? Which would be, the plans obviously are the drawings that a lot of people have seen. The specifications are, a very long document, something like 1,500 pages that explains, the plumbing fixtures shall be X, Y, and Z, and this will be X, Y, and Z. So it's very detailed. So I went through those whole specifications and I said, I want to meet with the Fontaine, who's a construction manager at risk. I want to meet with the owner's project manager town, and I wanted to go through this in detail. So one of the things I found, it was really interesting. When I went through this, I actually found something, and I'm going to ask you a question, Brian, on this, because what I found in the specifications, there is a section here, and I'm going to read it. It was 2.28 in the electrical specification, and it says, detention area cell door control panel. And it says, provide a graphic control indicator panel for operating detention area cell door electrical locks. Question is, why would there be detention area cell door electric locks in a DPW building?
Those rowdy DPW guys. That seems like it was put in there by mistake or maybe left in there by...
Well, where would you see, where would you see detention area cells?
Well, obviously the recently built police station.
Well, or a police station for that matter. So yes. And that's what came to my head. I said, wait a minute. Were these plans and specs copied from a police station?
Copy and paste.
And this happens a lot, I will say. And I wasn't surprised to see something like this in the specifications, because typically what happens is an architect or, primarily the architect will have done a job. And this specific architect had done other municipal buildings, such as a police station, and they will take that work product and they will modify it. Why? Because it's easier.
Right.
And they can make the same amount of money. So for $2 million for plans and specs, if I can get a lot of reuse, it's a lot of profitability in there.
It's like software at that point.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I dug into the actual drawings. Now, most people, I think, in the DPW project saw the envelope of the building, right? You saw the outside of it, there's windows, but it's the inside part that adds to the real cost of this.
Yeah, the shell's really just actually not that expensive.
Correct. And one of the things I did find, I will say this, on the electrical design is that same theme of police station is in there as well. And what I mean by that is, if you think about a police station, what's the operating parameters? Meaning, like, how often, how long does that building have to run?
Yeah, decades and decades, I would imagine.
And on a daily basis, what's their schedule?
24/7.
24/7.
Yeah.
Right. And they have a lot of equipment like radios and other things that can't lose power.
Mission
like
critical sort of stuff for public safety.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Now, I don't know. Yes, the DPW, if there was a storm, they probably need to do things, but they don't really have the requirements that a police station would have. Fair?
I would say, yeah, the police station and fire station are probably way higher spec than a DPW garage.
So the other thing I found in the electrical side was there's a generator on the DPW, which a lot of our buildings have a generator, right? So if the power goes out, you have power, lights come back on. Fine. But there was a 72-hour, it said a generator has to run for 72 hours. It's on diesel fuel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought to myself, well, Selco provides the power. Has Shrewsbury ever experienced a 3-day or longer power outage ever that you can remember?
No, I would bet somebody will say maybe storm of 78, right? But who knows?
The old
right?
78
The
comes
old
back again.
78, yeah.
So, or maybe the tornado of 50. What was that? I don't even know. What the year.
53?
I don't know.
Yes.
I'm sorry if we messed up the date. I know
Yeah.
that historians out there are going to give us a hard time, but we'll just wing that. I don't know. Yeah. So I was like, well, I don't think I've ever experienced I don't think we would experience a 3-day or longer power outage, which would require that level of diesel. And somebody said, well, so what? The gas tank's a little bit bigger. I said, well, it's more than that. There was another provision that if that generator should fail, they can wheel up another generator and run the whole entire building on a separate roll-up generator, which caused a lot of cost. So I said, okay, explain to me this provision. Because the other piece of this project, I will throw this in there, and I'm being a little bit, I guess, I didn't say catty, but maybe I'm trying to make this a little bit fun, was that there was this fuel island. You remember that discussion where it was like, should we keep the fuel island, take the fuel island out? And the fuel island is critical, right? You want to have the trucks, you want to fill up the gas pumps. You don't want them like queuing over at Flynn's or somewhere, like trying to get gas. Like, I get it. So it's important, but you have fuel on site. So I said, okay, so this just adds to the cost of the project. This is my point I'm making. So we have a situation that this plan would allow for a generator to run for over 3 days. And if that generator should fail or potentially run out of gas, and number one, the fuel island, which is 50 feet away, cannot fuel the generator, or we can't deliver diesel fuel, we can then roll up another generator to get that running, which would be delivered on a truck that would have to be running on diesel fuel. So all these things had to happen. It was like, well, what is the probability of that occurring? And it's probably like 0.0001% that would ever occur. But the cost of that electrical system to support that drove the price of the project, and that wasn't scrutinized to the extent it should have.
Yeah, it's like the NORAD of DPW garages at this point.
Because it was based off of what?
The police station.
A police station.
A police station.
Yes.
Maybe not our police station.
Right,
but,
a police station. So
Yeah.
people are going to say, well, Gregg, well, so what? Or what? How do we fix that? Or how did it happen? Put it that way. Well, I think what the problem is, in my mind, and this is something that I think we have to be cognizant of, especially with the high school project coming up, is when you're going through the process, I do not expect, and we shouldn't expect, that we are experts or town staff is experts on electrical systems of buildings. We have engineers. We're paying an architect. We're paying an owner's project manager to do all this work for us. We paid $2 million, over $2 million for this work. It's not the town's fault. It's not the committee's responsibility that we had created to find these things. I am a knowledgeable, I guess, expert in the electrical systems. It was really the responsibility of the architect, the owner's project manager, and the construction manager at risk to look at these things in that detail and say, you know what, guys? Shrewsbury, do you guys need everything we put in here?
Well, let's take this further, right? So you just happen to be an expert in electrical systems. What if a plumbing expert looks at this? What if, right, keep going down the line, all of the infrastructure we're building in things. And don't forget, the primary reason why this was voted down by the voters was the cost, right?
Exactly.
So if we don't have professionals, this goes back to government by bureaucracy. Everybody hates me using that word, but it's so true. This is a absolute perfect example of bureaucracy run amok. Nobody checked the math. Nobody checked the homework. you're relying on a third party whose vested interest is to just make the check, get the check. I'm not saying they're not going to design a good building, but nobody checked this, and it would have cost us money. Now, would they have put a jail cell in the DPW? No, they wouldn't have. They would have caught that, right?
Yeah.
But it still shows the inability and the inefficiency that's created, and the huge amount of money that was originally not a huge amount of money has a lot to do with this sort of paperwork.
Right. And that was the point. And my point, even on this, is to your point. We wouldn't have gone down the path and built it, but it was all about where the budget and the estimate came based off the expectations of the voter. It goes back to the expectation side. And if this was reviewed in more detail, or the people we hired had performed to expectations, we may have been in a position where that didn't happen, meaning the extra 10 million didn't come in 11th hour, and it said, actually, the budget we told everybody originally is accurate, and this whole thing may have passed.
What's the make good on something like this, right? So in a lot of industry, you make a mistake, you charge for this, right? There's some sort of penalty to the vendor.
Well, this is my opinion right now, I guess I'm going to say, because I'm not, I mean, I have seen the contracts, but I'm not looking at, I'm not a lawyer. And I don't know what is or isn't, let's say, enforceable. I do know that there's two things. Number one, there's professional liability insurance that exists for situations like this.
Right. Yeah.
But the other problem that you see in one of these projects is that there is an approval drawing process. So if I draw something, say I'm an architect, and I drew this, or I provided these plans, somebody has to approve them. And what I guarantee the architect is going to say in this instance is going to go, well, you approved it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not my fault. I showed it to you. You approved it. What do you want me to do about it? So that's the problem I think that comes up, is that they have kind of a built-in exit clauses here to avoid exactly what you're saying, is liability or actually having to be held accountable for this type of thing. It's just, that's the nature of the beast. And I guarantee you.
Yeah, they'll distribute the blame, right? Because
100%.
you're the person, the town signed on it, right?
And I guarantee this has happened at dozens and dozens of municipalities across the Commonwealth. And
Absolutely.
a lot of times it could just be, well, those budgets were passed, or the extra 5, 10. So if you look at why does municipal buildings, or why does government related spending always seem like it's escalated? It's not, everybody tries to say, well, it's prevailing wage. Well, that's one of it, but that's not it. It's things like this where other things are put in there because it's, well, we have every contingency known to mankind put in this building, so nothing else can happen. So
yeah, it's the old adage, right, where you see government an increase in budget, but they're screaming about the cut.
Exactly.
Well, no, we expected more budget, so therefore it's a cut. I want to use that in my salary negotiation.
Yeah.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. So I think we're good now in the DPW. I think we'll move past. We could spend obviously more time on that, but it is, I don't know where this actually stands currently. There isn't an official plan of what we're doing moving forward on that. So that's still to be discussed as far as what is the next steps in the DPW project here in Shrewsbury. But the other thing we talked about a lot before the election was the MBTA and 40B and the illustrious MBTA zone. And I guess in a little bit of irony, right? One of the first things that I did get to talk about when I came onto the board was, we have to deal with both the 40Bs we're going to be into that zone. And as we knew in episode 20, to be or 40B or not to 40B,
right?
Pulte switched zoning.
Shocking,
which we already knew. And they came back in front of the board in one of my early meetings and essentially said, we still are going to have this local agreement. We're not backing out of the local agreement. We're switching zoning, but do not fear, we still have a local agreement. And what they offered to us, which I mentioned was insulting. I actually which was interesting because we seen Essex feature. I mean, that was one of the funny things is we did these Unselects episodes. We're looking at the developers like on the screen and showing clips, and then the guy's sitting in front of me now, and I'm like, oh, here we go. And they offered us $25,000. That was what Pulte gave us. Instead of all, what we initially had, which was affordable units and everything we've talked about in the past, we got $25,000. I said, for all that, it's a little bit insulting. You know, and we just had to accept it and move on. So that was one of the first things. We also then had 409 South Street a little bit later, which was with Criterion. And that was essentially modifying the agreement that they initially had established and said, well, if you want us to stay at 40B, because we had said collectively, we would bet, I believe you said, I would make a wager that they will also convert and say, we're not going to do 40B.
Yeah.
Well, they stayed at 40B only if us as the select board had agreed to give them what amounted to $244,365 to be
You got
exact.
a lot of flack for that, I remember.
I know. Of, deferred permit costs.
Yeah.
Now, I will explain two things. Number one, the permit cost for us to deliver, the cost to serve that is really, from the town standpoint, the time of inspectors, right? So not a huge expense. But the part that I got into that actually got even more flack was that at a later meeting, I came back and I explained, because I felt it was important. It's a very complicated thing. I will pause.
Can I jump in there for a second?
Yeah, one second. Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, I appreciated you that, and I think other people did too, because it was the first time I saw a select board member actually explain something on why they voted for something.
Well, and I think a lot of times most of the members would be happy to do that. I think there is a kind of a hesitancy to make the meetings too long, or I can't speak on that behalf of the other members, but I know that other members, I think, would be more than happy to explain things. If somebody had asked them, they would be happy to explain it. Whether they would do it in the public meeting or not, I don't know. I just felt it was important because there was a nuance of this, but I think it's important to explain it here because that's what we do. We explain these things. So the reason I explained something, let me back up for 2 seconds here. If you recall, and this is the high level 40B, the only way to stop 40Bs, which would be unfriendly developments that we cannot stop, that are not approved by the planning board, that the zoning board of appeals has to approve, those big ones, like we talked about, 409 South Street, and then also 104 Main Street right now is in front of the zoning board of appeals. Those are 40B projects. The only way you can stop those in the future is to get to 10% affordable housing in your community. We're right now somewhere around 7. When the 409 South Street and 104 Main Street are permitted, we will be over 10. That will allow us to be in safe harbor for at least till 2030. And that's when the next census is run. And because that safe harbor provision is based off of the number of housing units that's calculated during the census. Still kind of complicated, but high level. Only way to stop it, get to 10%. The nuance on this is you can get to what they call interim safe harbor. That means for either a year or 2 years, you can stop 40B projects if you add a percentage of affordable units per year. However, in order to be eligible, you have to have a housing production plan filed with the state.
Right.
What happened here in Shrewsbury is ours expired.
It expired, and what happened then?
Nobody told
Nothing.
anybody.
Yeah, nothing happened.
Well, I shouldn't say nobody told anybody. I say the public wasn't aware. And if we would have submitted, let me just be clear, if we would have submitted the housing production plan, if that would have been renewed on time, when Pulte was permitted by the Zoning Board of Appeals as a 40B, before they switched, because that trigger is on when that comprehensive permit is issued by the Zoning Board of Appeals. At that moment, we would have entered safe harbor. We would have been in safe harbor for over a year. And when 104 Main wanted to come in front and start the process, we could have denied it.
Right. And so who's technically in the town, who's responsible for submitting that filing?
You're really going to put me on the spot on this.
I am. I just want to know. I'm an uninformed citizen, Greg, and I'm asking. Just curious.
Well, I'm not going to say a person.
No, I know. Not the person specifically. What body is supposed to do it?
Well, it's part of the Planning and Economic Development Department.
Yeah.
As well as, I think everything is then supervised by the town manager. And then ultimately the select board is the oversight of the whole piece.
Somebody have it, like in their Outlook, it says, how you have a meeting and it says housing production plan expiring, like 5 days. So it just beeps and you're like, oh, I forgot to do that. Because this is sort of a big deal, right? Once Pulte got their permit, The other two could have been, because then they would require a special permit. Is that correct? Is that what they would have had
No,
to go
I don't think it's a special. It's either you can still choose as a community. Like if somebody else comes in and says, I want to build a 40B. If you like the plan, if for some
Right,
reason
104 could have come along.
you could have still said, is it the zoning board of appeals doesn't have to decline it. It just gives them the ability to say, this is not a project that fits with the community for whatever reason.
There's a
we're gonna
lot more
invoke safe
leeway.
harbor.
There's a lot
Yes.
more ability. The ZBA could literally say
no.
They could say no, or they could say smaller
Yes,
or different format or whatever.
correct.
Yeah,
Yeah, they could do that.
yeah.
So like I said, I'm not trying. I'm hesitating here because I don't want people to think I'm not trying to specifically call out any individual. All I'm trying to say is that this actually occurred, and this is the impact because it occurred. And I think one of the roles that I have, or the purpose of being on that board, is to say, okay, how do we ensure these types of things don't happen in the future? Or like you mentioned, is there a different process we should be following to ensure that on a given yearly basis that we track all this? Because I will say this, there is a lot of minutia and nuance in the government because of the bureaucracy. So there's a lot of things the state puts on individual towns. There's a lot of reporting requirements. And I can see, it's those types of things can get missed. But to your point, I think when we're looking at what are the priorities for Shrewsbury, what do we want to do as a community, there's going to be a bucket there that says these are the top issues that 100% have to be addressed, no matter what.
I also think it does show that, it's not a spectator sport, right? In other words, you engaged, you did dig in, you found that this wasn't filed on time, and it's something, one, the public should know about. And two, to your point, maybe there's no person to blame because of the complexity, but it is a problem, right? It is the fact that if we don't have citizens and we don't have people that are holding the government of the town accountable, this type of stuff does get missed. And it does impact the town. Because if you look online or in any of the meetings, people don't want 104, right? They don't really want that big giant building.
No, it's not a good project for our town. And
Right.
I'm not, and that's not the minority opinion.
Yeah, I think most people agree, right? And so, but you're stuck now because you couldn't stop it.
Mm-hmm.
You now have to kind of approve it. So now you can stop the next one. Because the next one, now we're at capacity. If it gets approved, we're at capacity. And we can now say to 40B, no.
Correct. To 40B, no, which kind of
But
takes me
not.
to, well, no,
Yeah.
well, right. And then this is going to extend to a next part, because in the discussion of the fall town meeting warrant, because I do want to bring this up, I think it's a good time to talk about it, we've looked at these as well, because it all goes back to the MBTA as well, because the MBTA 3A was a overlay district.
Right.
So the term of overlay district is, it sits on top of underlying zoning. Well, we also have those in other places because there's other projects right now that are happening that people are aware of. The old Tinellas property, 525 Hartford Turnpike. There's another one on Route 9 in the Fairlawn area. And there's another one going back up Maple all the way up right at the other intersection across the street where the old bottling facility there.
Oh,
was.
Canada Dry.
The Canada Dry area
Yeah.
was. So there is those there, and those are utilizing overlay districts. And one of the things that we've talked about, one of the things I pushed, and we talked about in the select board meeting in detail, it was, maybe we should modify some of these overlay districts because we put them in a whole 20 years ago. And did we really get out of them what we thought? And now what we're seeing is, we have plenty of housing, and we're not really seeing the type of development we want. So let's see if we can put a pause on these overlay districts, because the last thing I want to see, and this is why I was advocating so much for it and brought it up to the town manager to say we need to put this on the fall warrant, is we're going to get to, this is how we see it. I'm with foresight here.
Yeah.
Right? I think you can see this too. It's like, we're going to get, all right, the 40B thing, we're going to get to safe harbor. And then everybody's going to think building's going to stop. And then somebody's going to go, they're going to see a community advocate article that's, hey, 400 units are going to be built here. And people are like, wait a minute, I thought we were in safe harbor. I'm like, well, that's an overlay district. That's different. So I think it's really critical that because of the way all this zoning nuance is, that we just need to be able to do everything in our power to control this in the best way. So we need to modify those. We need to put the brakes as best as we can. And unfortunately, because of the timing, when you have to have public hearings and everything else on some of these articles, the warrant articles, we're not able to get it into the fall town meeting. And currently, because it was talked about that we're looking at potentially a special town meeting before the end of the year, specifically on zoning. Now, a lot of people are going to go, wait a minute, Greg, you and Brian complain about spending money on these special meetings. And I would say, hold on a second.
I don't complain about special meetings. I complain about spending too much money.
Well, I know
on other things.
Okay,
but,
so let's say it costs $30,000 for a special town meeting. My whole point is, what is the cost to the community? One less apartment complex will completely be a great ROI on spending that money if we're able to do it. Meaning, what is the impact of the schools? What's the impact the police, fire, and these other things we talked about, roads, and
especially if they're using MBTA zoning because those are bigger units.
Well, yeah, but that one we can't really take out. But I'm just saying that if you look at where some of these others are proposed and what where the Route 20 district and the other overlays are, I think you would see a similar piece. So that at least is moving forward, meaning I think that there's some impact there. And hopefully I would say that because of my presence on the board, some of these things have gotten higher priority than maybe they were previously.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I was a little peeved with that only because I was at that meeting. And the thing I had a problem with again is, I know you can't make a comment, but I just feel like a lot of folks on the select board are very hesitant to make I wouldn't call it a rash decision, a quick decision, right? Some of the comments that came up is, we don't really know how the people think. You don't? Because I don't know. People are pretty adamant about building in this town, and they're pretty much against more development. That's just development after development after development. That's pretty obvious to people. And to basically use that, like, we didn't have enough time, I would have honestly got it on the warrant. If you made a mistake, you fix it. It's not that hard to go back and fix it, right? So that would be my criticism.
Well, and I think I actually made the comment in that meeting.
You might have, yeah.
Like you talked about, because it came up in the MBTA. When we were talking about the Supreme Judicial Court decision, there were comments that said, well, if the Supreme Judicial Court comes back and says, you don't have to do this, we can easily go back and modify the zoning. Because you're right, you can. Now, there is unintended pieces, and look, I'm all for making sure that we are able to take as much feedback as possible, but on the zoning piece, once something starts developing or gets a permit, you can't go back in time.
I think, it's funny. This is a little off topic, but I've been following a couple other towns with MBTA zoning that have still voted against it. And I think the town of Marshfield's up to their third or fourth vote because they keep bringing it up. And a couple of a good portion, number of these citizens actually got a third-party legal defense team that goes after these types of laws and has won around the country. And, it's sort of like, again, the towns tend to capitulate, but if you have a citizenry that's really, and that keeps voting against it, they're kind of saying, we're done. We're going to get a third party. They're going to sue the state. We're going to see what happens. We're going to put our cards on the table.
Yeah. So the next type of development thing I want to move forward to is, let's talk a little bit about Beale.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Civico, because that was another topic. If you went back and when I was campaigning, that certain neighborhoods, a lot of passion, a lot of polarizing views, let's say, on the Beale project, and just to kind of get up to speed on where we're at. Like Civico had come in front of us back in August, and essentially we gave them an extension, which I voted against. I think I was the only one, but
smartly voted against.
So I voted against that, mainly because I didn't really see how they were going to get to closing, because they hadn't given us what they should have. And I'm going to go through that because the situation still remains. Now, I like to go look, I like to read, I like to look at the legal documents, because most everything we do is a legal agreement, fair? At the time. So if you read this, I'm going to read from the provisions where it specifically says at least 60 days prior to closing date as defined herein. Now, the current closing date now that's adjusted is October 21st. Keep that in mind. Buyer shall deliver to seller for approval the following submissions, all in a form and substance reasonably satisfactory to the seller. Such approval shall not be unreasonably withheld, conditioned, and delayed in compliance with the agreement set forth, blah, blah, blah. Now, the big one that I had an issue with was financial pieces, and I'm going to read you this. It says they had to provide evidence that they had the money, effectively debt or equity, to not only to just buy the premises, which was only $250,000, but to actually build what they said they would that got approved in the through the planning board process. So they needed to provide development pro formas that said, here's how much it should cost to build. And then you got to show we have that much money to build
Yeah,
it.
we have it in the bank. We're ready
simple,
to go.
right? Or I can get it from my
Yeah.
bank. All right. That was supposed to be in the form of a commitment letter. So submittal of a commitment letter from an institutional lender of at least $14 million shall be deemed reasonable satisfactory evidence.
Yeah.
Term sheets is what they provided. That's not a commitment letter. That's like, yeah, here's what
Term sheet is not under the law or commitment letter.
Right. Commitment letter is, yes, if you want the money, we'll give it to you. And the other piece is that I had an issue with the pro forma that they gave me said the total construction costs were $15.9 million. The term sheets, the highest one they had was 12.7, I believe. So I had an issue because I said, well, where's the other 3.2 million coming from? You didn't show that you had it in the bank. So if you say it's going to cost 15.9 and you don't have money to build that, I don't think we can move forward.
You actually haven't shown that you have any money, but to your
Right.
point, yeah.
You know, if we go back to the closing date, like I still don't have this. Like, I don't know if we have it as a town, but I have not seen it. And it says here 60 days prior to closing. So 60 days before October 21st. Today is the 30th of September.
Yeah.
We would be in that window, correct?
Yeah, very much in that window.
Okay. So we're inside of 60 days.
Yeah.
Fair. We don't have it. So
No
they're in breach of
documents.
they're in breach of contract.
They're
Yeah.
once again in breach of contract because they were in breach of contract the first time around.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, it actually says here, now, how do you cure a breach? So this is, we're not going to get into contractual law today, but I know we like looking at this, but there usually is here's the assumption, I think you mentioned this before, what's the assumption of all contracts?
A contract is as good as to break it. You can break a contract.
So then, correct, that it will be broken.
Yeah.
And that, how do you fix it if it's broken is essentially what a lot of the
usually
language is.
in the contract is a remedy if it is broken because it is the right of anybody that creates a contract to actually break a contract.
So the remedy in this case says, if they fail to do what they said above, the seller can terminate this agreement upon writing delivered notice. If the buyer does not cure any breach within 5 days, essentially the whole contract is wiped off and the deal's done. So we could today send a note and say, you got to provide this documentation. And if they don't, within 5 days, we walk away.
Yeah, you can just walk away. Literally, it's in the contract.
Right. And that was the same situation we were in before we gave them the extension.
So we have right at this particular point in time, and I think it's important to know this, the town can literally walk away from that Beal deal. The thing that so many people hated, they have the right to walk away. It's just sort of a simple letter.
Well, technically, assuming, because like I said,
right,
the documentation that does it exist? Have we given what they have to provide for closing at this date that we're talking about?
As far as your personal and even in a public persona, have not seen anything that suggests that. And we do know that they did not have it the first time around, which was given an extension.
Yes.
So it sounds to me like, why wouldn't we walk away from this?
Well, that was my perspective.
Yeah.
Now, other people have a different perspective because look, I'm completely fine if somebody says, I think that's the right project for the town. I don't have an issue with that at all. I said, but I think in my head, what I believe the members of this community want to see is you can still say, if I'm dialoguing, if you come in front of the board, you can always say to the person who's coming in front, you can say, look, I think this is a great project. I'm glad you guys are here. Looking forward to working with
100%.
you. However, this is the part that I think people want to hear. However, I'm a little concerned. I'm concerned because you signed an agreement and I don't feel like you're meeting the obligations. And I'm a little bit concerned because I hold this. This is our land. This is our piece of property, right? I want to make sure that you're a good custodian for this property for the remainder of time. Yeah. So I would like you to treat it at the high accord that I treat it. And I want to make sure that this is not just a way for you to make a little money. And it's kind of like, well, we'll get to it when we get to it. I think that's a completely different way to handle things.
Well, yeah, that's a matter of integrity, a matter of trust, right? The ability to say, I want to work with a partner that is committed and will do the right thing. If the partner already breaks the rules early on, it goes back to a pattern of behavior, right? There's that
Right.
old, right? If people have a pattern of behavior and, oftentimes that pattern doesn't change.
Correct.
If the pattern of behavior of this current developer is this way, what gives us any expectation that it's going to get better?
None. And that was my stance, essentially. Like, I just didn't see it. Now, they may come in front of us. I know on the 14th of October is our last meeting before that deadline. They may have everything, but that was my perspective where I was coming from. So the other thing we got to get into here, Brian. All right. We're going to get into the form of government study. And the reason we're going to get into it is it does tie back to that last select board meeting, because we'll talk about this. We'll see how this goes. But before we do that, in that meeting, I do want to touch upon something quickly before we get to the form of government to finish off our welcome back episode here. Is there was we were talking about a movie that was going to be filmed in town, and I do want to make a couple good comments about said movie. So I do want to go here and talk. I'm going to actually play a clip here from the meeting. Introducing that article or introducing the agenda item to talk about the road closures. So let me just play that real quick.
Item number 12 is to review and act on the road closure request of Mark Fitzgerald, Apple Studios, Inc. for a portion of Grafton Street in the area of 708 Grafton Street on October 8th, 2025 from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. I guess they're filming a movie called Cheesesteak.
Now, in that clip, we know what road it was, when it was going to be, the name of the movie. That's it.
Yeah.
We know it's a movie. So fair enough. Now this, the reason I'm bringing this up is I'm going to then play a second clip here from somebody from Apple Studios in that meeting explaining a little bit about the movie itself. And then and people are still probably like, why on earth are you talking about this? I'll get to that part, because trust me, just stay with us on this one. So here is more detail about this movie.
Perhaps when this is nominated for an Oscar, we'll appreciate the Shrewsbury recognition.
Well, I'll tell you, I've worked, this is my sixth Mark Wahlberg movie, and if he was ever going to get nominated, this is the one, I promise you.
Is there a...
It's a great story. It's a great story. Mark plays a long-haul trucker, and his son has autism, and they do a bunch of road trips to Bond to go to all of the NBA arenas.
All right.
So that was provided by Apple Studios. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, here's why I'm bringing it up. That reference to Mark Wahlberg was brought up by Apple themselves in the meeting. Now, I want to make this as a public service announcement. If you come in front of the select board or any other board in a public meeting,
recorded no less,
recorded public meeting, anything that you say and anything that's discussed is part of a public record.
correct.
That's just an FYI. And the reason I mention is because after this, I will say this, is that somebody from Apple Studios reached out to the town of Shrewsbury, and they complained that articles were published about the movie and who was in it.
Okay. Somebody from Apple Studios.
Yes.
Wasn't the guy who mentioned Mark Wahlberg.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But the whole thing to me, and the reason I bring it up is like, I'm like, but it was a
Public meeting.
So, I
can't
always
be
say
that
that,
dense.
say, okay, is a global media company, you need to know, and this is not the first time you've ever closed a road.
The largest, I think it's the wealthiest company in the world.
Yeah. And you probably have closed other roads at other movie productions.
Once in a
you
while.
probably know that those meetings, when you go in front of the government, are public, and that information is out there for anybody.
Right.
So I just found it interesting.
Yeah, and I think the problem is, if you think about it, it's kind of goofy, right? You can literally Google cheesesteak movie, which isn't the real name of the movie. That's like the
Right.
code name. And it comes up that it's a Mark Wahlberg movie,
I know.
right? And it also shows that, think about just this week, The Walking Dead was filming down in Worcester. There's like a lot of people there taking pictures. People that want to show up to see a movie star will show up. They don't need like a local newspaper to tell them. Like, it's kind of crazy.
No, and with social media today, all that kind of stuff just blows up anyway.
Yeah.
You don't need a formal, journalist or
Some of the
media
friends of the
company to do
show
this.
posted, Mocky Mock coming to Shrewsbury. Very excited. Very excited.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that is coming, by the Flynn's there on Grafton Street. So stay tuned for that clip. So let's get to this form of government study. And let's just get your perspective, Brian, because obviously you're part of this. This was something that we had talked about. This stemmed from the planning board citizens petition. That's really what I think was the catalyst when we did that, or said I did that in the last fall, and essentially trying to convert the planning board from an appointed to an elected board.
Yeah.
During the town meeting and the board, finance committee, select board discussions, it kind of came out, you know what, maybe we ought to look at how we're structured. What are the boards and committees? Who's appointed? Who's not? Is the structure of our government working for Shrewsbury now into the future? So they created the charge. We signed off on the charge as a member of the select board. I signed off on it, said, yep, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have 10 members of the public. We're going to have one select board member, and we're off and running as part of this process.
Yeah.
So you decided to apply to be one of the resident members, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And why did you do that?
Well, it's something that came out of, as you said, a year's worth of talking about the town and the how many people actually participate in town government. We had a meeting, if you remember, I don't know, almost a year ago, or at least half a year ago, with John Samia, who was the chairperson previously, and Beth Cassavant, and he brought up even, hey, we're thinking about this possibility we might do this form of government committee. You guys really should think about being on that, right? You've really pushed this. You've really made this a forefront. And so I realized this is something that I'm super interested in. I think I've had a lot of experience in the past year or so with the town and could bring a kind of a unique viewpoint. I don't have a dog in the chase. In other words, I really don't know what our form of government should be. I have no idea.
Okay.
But I do think we need disparate sources from the town to be on this committee.
Agreed. So the process was, back in August, everybody had applied, or the applicants who applied, we voted as a board on 10 individuals, or we could vote on rating the top 10 people. You didn't have to vote for 10, just to be clear. The rules are not that you have to vote. Then say must vote for 10 or you will be disqualified. It's saying rank your top 10. So if you have less than 10, you might vote for less. That's what I chose to do. Why did I choose to do that? Because as I mentioned in the meeting, I was really wanted to ensure that somebody like yourself had a best chance of getting on the committee, because I knew, as the other members of the select board had said, all the people who apply are more than qualified to be on the committee, and they're going to select and appoint people. But I wanted to make sure that there were some voices who I knew were going to dig into this deep, would do the work, would look at it from a legal standpoint, would look at it from an impact to the community, to ensure that we maximize the voice of the community and not minimize it and centralize it too much. And that's where I thought what you would bring. And that's why I voted for you as my first choice. So in that process, 10 people were appointed, and they also appointed a select board member. I had raised my hand for that to be the select board representative. My colleagues decided to choose Carlos Garcia. And then what happened next, I guess, after that meeting?
Yeah, so I looked at the list, and I was going through the bylaws and the Town Manager Act, because, believe it or not, I actually enjoy reading that stuff. And I saw that the Town Manager Act specifically says that school committee members, finance committee members, and even select board members cannot be members of other committees. It's specifically written in our laws, right? It's a law of the land. Now, a select board member can be on certain building committees. And as I learned, certain members of those committees, if they're chosen ex parte, in other words, they're part of the original documents, which I still don't agree with necessarily, they can be. So Carlos Garcia was picked. I originally said, I'm not sure if he's eligible, but it turns out he was, because he was an ex parte.
Let's pause on that for a second.
Yeah.
And I think I'll go back to what I think the intent was. Of course, I don't know the intent in 1953 or 55 of what people were thinking. We probably have records probably sitting right behind where I sit on the select board in one of those shelves. There's probably a document there that explains this. But I think the reason it was is, like, if you think about it, we want to broaden the number of people who are participating. We don't want to centralize everything, and that the select board's also on these other four committees.
Well, it becomes cronyism, right? It was to avoid cronyism.
Exactly.
It's to avoid, it's actually to create impartiality.
And I think where you were going with when you talk about the ex officio, I think is how technically,
ex officio.
But ex officio. And the reason I kind of see what you're saying is that, well, I could get around it. And we say, well, if we want to get around this the charter, we just specifically say that this committee shall have a select board member, a school committee member, or whatever, a finance committee member. And then guess what? By ex officio, boom, boom, right in there.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's, you kind of have to think about, well, maybe should that be allowed? Well, that's exactly what this form of government study could talk about.
Right. And
so,
I challenged it.
Yeah.
I challenged it. And, the town manager consulted with the town council. I did ask for that letter and I was refused it, but I did ask for it. But the town council agreed with me. They said, yes, this a particular committee member. And again, it's not about personalities. This is about, making sure we're following the law. And that person had to be removed from the committee, which I think you guys did.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that triggered.
The vote.
Which actually, well, it had triggered, I'd say, the remedy. If we go back to this, how are we going to remedy this?
Yeah.
And it was how we can vote on it. And that was, I think, what was hotly contested, shall we
Yes.
say, at the last select board member meeting, because my thought process on this was, well, we already had this weighted vote. We'll just go to the next person because you had tied. Let's be specific. You had tied for 10th place with somebody else.
Yeah.
And then that was specifically voted on by the board. They had chosen the other individual. And therefore, you were next in line, let's say, as tied for 10th. So my thought was, well, just go back to that same vote and say the next person in line would be Brian. Or if people disagree with that, then revote the whole committee, because now your pool of candidates is different. And in order to really be fair to everyone, your vote would change based off of a certain person being on or off that list of potential appointees. Let's just revote the whole thing. One of those two.
Yeah.
And the third option was chosen, like I say, and that's what my peers decided to do.
Yeah, and I think the problem going through that, right, is you've got there's a number of problems, right? First off, you had a vote, and you had this scoring mechanism. And what I had a problem with, first of all, was one, the chairperson, Teresa Flynn, said, well, no, that really had no impact whatsoever. That wasn't a scoring vote. That was just something else that just happened to exactly match the vote. We don't know what that was. It was some sort of weird secret vote thing, but she insisted second meeting, even though in the first meeting she said it was a vote. The second meeting she said it wasn't a vote. So we still don't know what it was. And therefore that was the reasoning why I couldn't be placed on it, because in her opinion and the others on the board, well, no, that wasn't a real vote.
Well, let me just clarify. It's not secret. I don't like the word secret. You do fill it out like it's not in public.
Yeah, it's
because it's not secret, because
me.
you can get it, like you say, in part of, it's discoverable information. So it's saying it's the format that's been used for appointments.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I've talked to my fellow peers about it.
I think it's very non-transparent.
Potentially changing that in the future, but it's something I think we will obviously be discussing, I think, moving forward. But anyway, so in the meeting.
Yeah, so it got contentious, I would say. The board obviously chose to go in a different direction and vote for somebody else, which I'm fine with. Again, it's sort of like whatever. I just think the process, how they went about the process, I felt was a little bit duplicitous. I felt it was a little bit bending in a way just to make sure that I couldn't get on the committee. It's pretty easy to see.
But what I do want to pause here for a second and say is that one of the things that you've always talked about, and this resonated with me when I started thinking about this after that meeting, was there's a word you always like to use, and you said this at town meeting. You say we should have vociferous debate.
Vociferous debate.
What does
absolutely.
that mean?
Be honest, right? Be honest and be forthright. You're not going to offend anybody. Like, I would have rather somebody say, look, I think Brian's a rabble-rouser and I don't really want him on a committee. Okay, that's fine. That's your opinion. I'm not going to cry about that, right? I'm not even going to get upset about that. I'd honestly say, wow, thanks for saying that. I'm okay with that. Maybe I need to change my approach. Maybe that's why, right?
Yep.
But the idea that it's a dance around things, right? If you look at town meetings, even if you look at Barron versus Calenda, the Supreme Judicial Court, which basically allows for people to call select board members all sorts of nasty names and get away with it, which I won't do, but in a public meeting, They did that because they looked at the history of town meetings in the country, and especially in Massachusetts. And they said they're angry and they're vociferous and they debate, right? We want that. We need that because it's citizens getting involved, and we're not always going to agree. And sometimes all these kind of hidden little niceties get in the way.
Well, and this is kind of what the point I wanted to make was, I don't think there's anything wrong with any board having those types of discussions.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's okay if people in public show that they're impassioned about something, and it was still to the point of it's respectful or not, we're not making personal digs on each other.
Yeah.
If it's about your decision, I think it's totally fine, and sometimes it's good to see. So
yeah.
While I think people get, I guess my sense was that it's kind of like this, did you see what happened there? And it's like, well, if you really go back and watch it, it was passionate people, passionate about a topic,
good to see,
trying to resolve a conflict in public.
Yeah.
And that's what I think, I should say, we've even said might have been lacking. And not to say that you have to have an argument or you have to disagree with every single topic, but on those topics that could be, not say whether polarizing or you could have a difference of opinion than me, I think we owe it to the public to allow that discussion and debate to be seen, even if at times it seems a little messy.
Yeah. I mean, I remember much younger, I was involved in just watching politics when I lived in Worcester as a teenager. And politics was sort of something that my family really liked. And we used to watch the city council meeting. And they would get heated and really go after each other in a respectful manner, but go after each other. And I look at sometimes what happens in the town. I'm like, how come everybody agrees? This is impossible. How can everybody be so agreeable to all of these relatively contentious things? Again, to your point, it shouldn't happen all the time, but I want to call out people, and I will call out people. Like, for instance, I said out loud, and I do mean it, like, ignorance of the law is not an excuse, right? You can't use your ignorance of something and then say, cut me some slack. Maybe a little, but you're representing the town. You're somebody that's supposed to know better. And I want to make sure that we call that out.
Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of run out of time today on this. I know the opening episode here back of season 2 of the Unselects, as we called it, unscripted, only because, we're not going to have the clips. We're not going to probably have single topic things, but I think we're going to dialogue like this about what is going on in town. And we'll be doing this frequently again, I hope. And, we'll keep going. But, I do want to say, just as my closing here is, I do really enjoy being on the board. I know that there's been, it's a little bit of some growing pains, let's say, amongst how the board operates, maybe my opinion versus my colleagues. But I think there's been a lot of healthy conversation, honestly, between me and the other board members. And, I really am looking forward to really attacking some of the bigger issues that we have coming up here in town over the next few years, while I'm still on the seat until at least 2028 of May. So
yeah, and let me bring in one thing. There's an election coming up. There's 2 people on the that are up for re-election. I don't know if they're going to run for re-election right now. I don't think anybody's actually announced, right? But it's I think Carlos Garcia and Beth Cassavant. The thing is, if you don't like the way things are going, Gregg stepped up and he ran for office. If you don't like it, step up. Run for office, right? Make your voice heard, because that's what changes everything, right? It's not about personalities. It's about how you want to see the town governed. And if you think you can do a better job and you have that platform, you should go for it.
Absolutely. And with that, I'm Gregg Richards.
And I'm Brian Costello.
And we are the Unselects.